Good morning and welcome to our August edition of our Globally Learning Thought Leader Series. I am Gary Schulteis, the president of Globally Learning. I'm joined by Matt Patterson, who is the VP of Global Sales for our company. And in this particular segment, we have decided to dive into the technology and engineering side of localization of e-learning content. And with that, I am very pleased that we can be joined by our very own Chief Technology Officer from Globally Learning, Gilbert Segura. Gilbert has been in this industry for more than 20 years. He's a guest speaker at Loc World and Gala and other different conferences. And it's been our privilege to have him as our CTO for the last 5 years. So Gilbert, welcome to our series, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gary.
And to start off with, we might as well begin with that very title. You are the company's Chief Technology Officer, and Globally Learning is not that big of a company. You know, we're in the small to medium size range, and yet for the last 4 years, you've held that title for this company. So what is it? Why is it necessary for a company of this size to have a Chief Technology Officer?
Yeah, so just to frame the question a little differently, what does technology enable you to do, right? It lets you do things that, if you think of even the most primitive technologies like the wheel or the inclined plane or a screw or anything like that, these are mechanical things that give you a tremendous advantage and leverage. So if you look at technology as your way to leverage your resources in a far more efficient and scalable fashion, that's why I'm here. And to be honest with you, we've done that. So we were able to take rudimentary processes that everyone can do and then specialize them and then improve them and further refine and improve them. So to put it a different way, technology lets you punch above your weight class. It lets you do things that normally you couldn't do. And the biggest technology companies and the smallest technology companies are indistinguishable in the end result, meaning you get more done faster, better, cheaper. So it's definitely a way to leverage a lot of information and get more done with less.
I see. And so from the standpoint of this company and what you're doing with us, can you just give us a couple of examples of things that you have to work on that basically impact what we're doing now and what we're doing perhaps in the next, let's say, the foreseeable future?
Definitely. So we do a lot of, I wouldn't call it scientific method, but we definitely learn from our mistakes or see opportunities for scale. I think scale is probably the primary thing we do, which we enable not only our team, but our linguists or our customers to get more done. So bulky, large amounts of things are basically our specialty in some cases for some people, because we have continuous localization, for example, where we receive thousands upon thousands of requests a week, and we're able to process them in a pretty seamless, efficient manner. Other ways, like we have really complicated e-learning projects that require a lot of information about how does this work, how do you pull this apart, how do you put it back together. That's a classic example of learning more about something, standardizing the inputs, and then optimizing the methods and processes. So e-learning is definitely a big example where we can get a storyline file, process it faster, better, and I'd say every 4 to 5 months, you have some kind of improvement on some part of that process.
And we're in the middle of a production summit, as you know,
Yes.
Here at the company. And we just had a presentation from a sales perspective about one particular client who came in with 110 courses, had a deadline, but didn't have a whole lot of other information about all these courses, gave you 23 of them as a sample. That's one of those examples where you're asked to look at and try to peel out everything that goes into an e-learning course and then extrapolate, what would be the overall scope of 110 of these.
Right.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's part of the challenge. The other part is, and this is for everyone, what do you do with that scope? Meaning, you're the client. You go to Globally Learning and you ask them, "Can you help me do this? I need this done by this budget, this deadline, this process," and there's a lot of unknowns. So it's really about providing structure, and I would say a rigid methodology, but more or less an adaptable one that says, look, for X item, there's Y thing happening. And we just apply formulas and different insights. I'm not going to be very vague here because obviously every project is different, but a project with 120 something files and 20 only provided, you have to extrapolate. And that extrapolation requires some rigor. And we also do testing, like we would say, okay, for 20 files is this much. What about 40, 40 files is double the amount reasonable? There's always I would call it a sniff test, or is this is a rational, reasonable expectation? And I think we'll guess, but we'll do it an educated guess, and we'll try to be as scientific as possible. And occasionally we'll have to re-guess differently for different projects for different conditions. So it's part of the task is to make sure that you have all the elements mapped out properly, sized properly, identified properly. And that's a lot of complexity potentially, because how many videos does this course have? Okay, that's one. How about two or three? So you have to start making educated guesses. And my favorite phrase is, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Because really what you're asking is, how many videos, how many minutes, how many slides, how many words, how many people? Are 5 people really talking for 5 minutes each? That's so much time, right? So it's always boundaries, setting the boundaries and identifying them. That gives you the scope and then lets you execute.
Very good.
Yeah, so Gilbert, along with that scope, I mean, we have a reputation within this industry of managing really, really complex multimedia projects. You know that, and typically when they come in, they get placed on your desk and ask for you to parse them. So, how do you keep up both accuracy and speed with that? Because both those are obviously important to customers, along with price, right? You've got your triangle: accuracy, quality, price, and speed. But could you just give us an idea, more of an idea? Because I know you talked about storyline files, but then there's Camtasia files, and there's Captivate files, and there's every other After Effects, all kinds of files that come across your desk. So just what do you do, and what's your approach to keep that up so that we can keep this engine fully running and moving at a great pace?
Well, I mean, there's some proprietary secret sauce I won't share, obviously. But what we end up doing is basically kind of having a cookbook and experience, right? And whenever I run across a new e-learning thing, and there's always a new e-learning thing, there's no different thing. I look a little bit behind its curtain and say, how does this function? What's it working? What kind of application is this? What kind of technology is in play here? Is it Articulate Rise is a good example where they had a web-based technology and they were using specific technologies in their stack, and I could, decipher them to some degree. And so every different technology tool approach requires a different set of tools that we have a toolbox for. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of reverse engineering, a lot of creativity, and then just basically, I hate to say it, sometimes just throwing stuff and see what sticks. And some technologies, some situations, like even simple things like, here's a PowerPoint. By the way, it's been recorded to a video. I don't have the PowerPoint. It's something we would get from a client. Maybe their predecessor did it. They lost the file. We have to reconstruct things. So we're always kind of working sometimes from the end. We're working backwards from, this is our deliverable done, but can you find out how to make it in Chinese or Arabic or Hebrew, or put it backwards or upside down or some other thing, right? So we're constantly taking the deliverable to the customer, and they're the end customer in France or Germany or Japan or wherever they may be, and we're making sure that they get a good experience. So reverse engineering that experience with the technology and the tool set that they have. That's a long answer, but that's basically how we do it.
No, it's great. And what I hear from that, the short answer of it is you have to be agile, right?
Yes.
You have to be able to go wherever you need to go. So my follow-up to that question, Gilbert, is how do you stay agile? How do you yourself stay on top of it and say, hey, here's what I need to do in order to do this?
We constantly keep looking. I guess it's like a shark that has to keep swimming to breathe. I'm not a shark because, well, I don't like that. It's too messy. But what I do see is that we are constantly looking for new things and technologies, and they're constantly evolving. So going to conferences, reading blogs or website or LinkedIn, or just keeping your ear to the ground and saying, oh, this is a new thing, or identifying longstanding problems that are getting new solutions, right? So there's transcription technologies, speech technologies, AI, all these other things that people are bringing to the table to address longstanding issues that, we can definitely say, okay, that's interesting. And sometimes the technology takes a long time to gestate. It takes like a year or 5 years or 10 years. So it's also being aware of like, I remember that from 2 years ago. That thing wasn't very good. Now it's really good. There's not to blame anything, but Madcap Flare is a great example where 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was a real royal pain to work with.
Yeah.
But some people loved it because it did some things very well. And this is classic, right? You have a wonderful tool that it's easy to author. It does magic for you, whatever the author needs, but it doesn't have this. It's got a little blind side. It is a blind spot for localization, which is unfortunately common, or a blind side for, double byte support. So it can't do Japanese or Russian. There's always some little, oops, we forgot about that. But they do all this other stuff great.
Yeah.
And then you wait a couple years, and lo and behold, somebody somewhere, usually within that company, if they're smart and they're still around, will fix it. And they'll make this new version. So Articulate, at first didn't support localization very well. Then they started supporting XLIF. Then they got even better and better and better. So I guess the whole point of it is you keep looking and you keep poking and prodding. And then you go back to things and circle back and say, okay, is this still a problem? It's like, okay, yeah, that's still a problem. And invariably, somewhere else will come up with a solution that's not even related to that, and you can apply it. So definitely a lot of curiosity around it, and just a lot of investigation, and then just continuously poking around. Obviously, I have a whole day job to do as well, so it's I kind of sneak it in every once in a while, and I go, oh, okay, because part of my job is researching, right? I have WordPress, and I have plugins, and I have PHP, which is like this web authoring thing. So every project that comes to my desk is an opportunity to rediscover and examine, okay, what's the same, what's new? Even old things have surprises.
Yeah, and Gilbert, while we're on this technology string, our audience may or may not know in this case, but you are at the forefront of a technology that I find pretty cool, which is text-to-speech, right?
Yes.
And TTS, as we call it in the industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about what TTS is? Because you've traveled around the world to speak about it, and why it's so cool, and why is it growing in popularity?
Yeah, so text-to-speech, TTS, is it's a synthetic media, if you think about it, right? So in the good old days, when you need something done, somebody would get a piece of paper and read it in front of a microphone, and you'd have to pay for that person to show up, you'd have to record it, and then you'd have to edit it. Life goes on. That's a very labor-intensive, people-intensive process, and it's very expensive. Now, I'll tell you what, people do wonderful work here. This is a long-standing trend. There's voice actors and all kinds of stuff, and they all deserve the credit for what they do. But from a business perspective, sometimes you just need to say, click next, or it's low-hanging fruit that's not that important, or it's a safety manual that's kind of boring and dry, and it should be, meaning it's like, don't stick your hand in the shredder. Okay, that makes sense, but you need to hear that from a very calm cadence, and you need it in 20 languages.
Yeah.
So if you have a challenge where I need to do something in umpteen languages, and each language is going to cost me several $100, $1,000 to book a recording artist just for that language, you have to have coordination, bunch of overhead, bunch of people, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a nightmare. And what ends up happening is that those types of projects don't get done. Meaning, it's not that we're taking away work from people with TTS. We're actually providing more audio-visual content for people who enjoy that more. And it's been proven that when you have a recording and you have video and you have audio, you have an interactive experience, it's a better learning experience. It's a better outcome. And maybe you don't have to look at it. You can look away and still hear the talking. And that means something. So in a sense, it gets you a better product. So you have a better product. You have an availability for something that you previously didn't have. And if you can't find an Indonesian speaker to do your recording at 3 a.m. their time, which is invariably what happens, the TTS engine can do that. So the engines are really where the magic happens. And the magic's been happening at Google, at Amazon, at Microsoft, Apple. A bunch of vendors are stepping into this and saying, look, we have technology, we have the scientists, we have the magic, we have the Alexa, we have these things that can talk for you or to you, and you can feed things in there. So we definitely want to have TTS as an option for people because it does open a lot of doors. It's a lower cost option. Now, that all said, TTS is growing and it's getting better every day with neural, which is a buzzword for smarter. But at the end of the day, some people say, look, that's too robotic. It doesn't have empathy. It doesn't have passion or emotion. And you're kind of right. I mean, in some cases, the tools are getting better, but people will always want to have an emphatic reading of Hamlet, or some kind of children's book will have a story. And so new providers are starting to enter that, but it's still on its early days. So for the most part, it's pretty good, and it'll fit, I'd say, most use cases. It's also just a really low cost, efficient option, speedy and quick and easy to do. Because my engineers can type out, 100 words or something and give it to you in 60 languages or 100 languages. It just takes engineering time versus booking and getting all those people to show up, which is really the big advantage.
Yeah. So let me ask a question that just popped up in my mind here. With machine learning, we were on a curve like this, and then it just went up, right? Where it's learning more and more and more, becoming smarter and smarter. My question is more on the top of this graph, right? Yeah. Is it going to continue to go up, or are we eventually going to plane out here to where, like you said, the emotions are hard to program? It's hard to do that with TTS. Is it going to plane out to where, this will take 10 more years to find these emotions or to program that? Or do you see that coming fairly sooner than 10 years, 20 years down the road?
Well, the 10 years have been there, right? I mean, if you think about it, TTS, text-to-speech, started in Bell Labs, World War II era, it's even older than that. I think there's pictures in some library about a device that you can push pedals like a pipe organ and make speech sounds. Kind of creepy, but it's out there.
Yeah.
So, this is old stuff. So we've been at this for, I'd say, over 50 years. Not me, obviously, but the technology and the people working on it. So every year there's new advances, new AI advances. There's the whole scary deep fake thing. We can talk about that because I have a couple blog posts about it. But really what's interesting is you can fake it, but it's actually just as easy to make better. Meaning, instead of faking other people's voices and being afraid of that, we should say, wait a minute, if I can get a really good emphatic voice doing this, then we can get it done. So I would say that type of technology, the emphatic voice and the proper diction sounding things, it's kind of already here. That famous William Gibson quote everyone spouts out, technology, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. The fact of the matter is, in some cases, in English language, you have it. We can have voices impersonate famous politicians. Barack Obama is a famous example where, there's examples of David Beckham speaking in 20 languages, etc. These things are here, but they're always limited to English, and they're not very multilingual. So I would say we're in phase 1 of 4, and I'd say in the next 3 to 4 years, we'll have much better. 5 to 6, we'll have really good. And after that, it's kind of ubiquity. It's like, well, can I have a phone that's a computer and a personal assistant? Yeah. But you asked me 20 years ago or 15 years ago, will I have a smartphone right? That was a word. Will I have a smartphone that lets me work like this? And I'm still using fax machines, right? I mean, think about it. We go from fax machines to emails to, I don't know what we have today, in the sense that it doesn't even map. So I think we are definitely on the cusp of changes. And then in the next 5 to 6 years, we'll have much better.
Yep.
Now, Gilbert, from the standpoint, you brought up this business decision on using text-to-speech, and you gave the example that if someone has, let's say, some content and it has to go into many languages, and let's say the deadline's fairly short, you're right. The studio time to bring in all these different voice actors from every language is just a little bit of a nightmare to organize. But the other scenario that you and I have faced that maybe you can talk about briefly is the company that comes in and says, look, we have a training session and we know that every quarter we're going to have to upgrade or improve or do something different with it. Not a wholesale change, but let's say the environment is changing such that we have to update the material to keep it relevant. And in that situation, when you know that in 2 or 3 months, you're going to make changes to your content, but small, that's where TTS has an advantage, right? Because otherwise, with a human voice actor, you're bringing that person all the way back in. And what you thought would take maybe a couple or 3 days to make the change and get the new version out is now taking 2 weeks because
Yeah.
simply not getting the person into the studio.
No, I think you're right. People have lives. I mean, and they should take vacation, right? Hopefully, it's a good thing, not like their kid is sick or they get in an accident and they have to be in the hospital or something horrible. It's the truth of the matter is the TTS engine won't change on you. If it does, it'll get better, which is an interesting non problem. But yeah, definitely year over year, you can come back and record the same thing with slight variations to it, and it'll sound the same every time. And for incremental changes, like cybersecurity is a great example where every year, yeah, it's phishing. Now there's vishing. Now there's something else with the sound ishing. There's always going to be some threat like that, and it's constantly evolving. And so now you got to tell people to do things differently. But you want to reuse some of it, but you want to re-record or not re-record, and that becomes a programming issue for people creating this content. With TTS, you don't have that problem. And
Right.
the other thing is it's scalable, again, as we were saying, with many languages. So if you want to add a language and then you want to change something in that language, you can customize it. And in fact, you can customize it infinitely compared to having people and scripts and all that overhead with people showing up and leaving or not being available. So definitely it creates a different type of production workflow for content creators who want to have continual multimedia audiovisual updates. It does provide a lot of advantage there.
Right. Now, as you know, we do with Global eLearning, we do probably over 100 languages as far as doing content localization. Is these platforms that you mentioned that have TTS, do you get, can they match that, or are they up to 100 languages that they have synthetic voices for? And within any language, do you really have a choice? If I go and I ask for a French Canadian, or if I need to get to, let's say, a Hungarian language, do I get a choice of gender? Do I get a choice of different high pitch, low pitch type of voices, or what am I expecting to see?
It's definitely a mixed bag. You do get over 130, 150 languages just because of the different providers altogether. Any given provider usually has 40 to 50, maybe 60. Not always the same. Surprising omissions or lack of offerings in terms of like Spanish on Amazon. You don't get as many as you could. It's changed now. Again, this is every year, every 5 to 6 months, a new engine's trained, a new thing is done, it's rolled out. So they're constantly evolving. The answer is yes, you do get a lot of options, but not always all the ones you think, because Icelandic may not have a lot of options. Or, there's some languages, and this is true in a lot of technologies, where we don't have a lot of speakers. We don't have, there's over thousands of languages. In Mexico alone, there's like 300 languages that are indigenous Incan dialects and other Mayan dialects. Those don't have enough representation. So low density languages do create some problems. And these technologies, unfortunately, are slightly biased towards Romance languages, the big stuff like, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Russian, all the big languages we all know. If you can go to a restaurant and order that food, there's probably a TTS language for it.
Yeah, good. Listen, part of your function with our company is to always be evaluating technologies. And you and I have had many, many discussions in your 4 years with us about certain technologies that you believe that we should be considering and looking into investing in and all this. And so my question to you that you could share with our audience is, as a CTO, there is many things you see. How do you do your personal evaluation to say, at what point do I bring this up to the president that I want him to consider, or her to consider, that this is something to invest in? So in many ways, you have to filter and you have to look at, and I know it's specific to every company, to where we're actually headed as a company, but there is this way, a process of how you look at technology and say, hey, this is right. Or how do you detect that it's not quite mature enough to say it's going to be a headache to use because we don't understand enough of it yet?
Yeah, so it's definitely a kind of a puzzle that you filter out the pieces that don't match, right? And one of those is, is the mature technology ready for the market? And sometimes technologies are taken to market before they're ready for a reason, because the people developing it don't actually entirely know what to do with it, right? So this is an AI model for this, or whatever this does or that does. And so what I end up doing is taking something, looking at it, and first of all, see if it works. Does it do what it says on the tin? And a lot of times they don't, and that's okay. I mean, people have to try, and they're experimenting. There's 1,000+ GitHub projects out there that take some white paper from some researcher, and then they put it into play. One technology, for example, that I found works really well is the automated transcription technologies. Again, this is like a 3-year-old thing, but 2 or 3 years ago, the technology for automated speech recognition or transcription came out really powerful, and it's everywhere now. And so the technology, the information, the knowledge of how to do it, the implementation, then what it boils down to is who's done it better, who's got an API, who's got a rational billing thing, who's not charging an arm and a leg for something that, the prices are all different, the implementations are all different. So then it's just filtering out, okay, it works, who does it best, how much does it cost, and then can we get it to use. There's also a little secret thing that's like a hidden hazard is licensing. If people say, well, you can use it, but you can't use it commercially. Okay, that's not a business thing. Or you can use it commercially, but we have to get a cut of the profits. You gotta get royalties. That doesn't work either, right? So there's always gotchas that have nothing to do with the technology. It's all about the business environment, the legal ramifications. Is it ethical? Maybe they're using things that you shouldn't be using, but it works really great. Okay, we can't do that either. So there's a lot of technologies that should work and are great, but maybe have other problems that aren't even technology based. They're more like the business side of it or the legal side of it.
Gotcha. Now, I'm going to ask you, and without getting into proprietary things for our company, so be careful what you say here, Gilbert.
Yeah.
What can you share with our audience as far as things that you see happening in the next year or two? You brought up the automatic speech recognition things, but what do you see that you're kind of poking your interest in right now that you think is going to be something that we might be interested in, or other companies that are doing language services might be very interested in let's say the next year or two?
Well, the cloud service providers are actually starting to create better technologies around localization needs, because they've always had them, right? Microsoft has always had the pain of putting Office in every computer they can across the planet. Google wants to do everything everywhere. So if you look at those guys, they tend to have a pattern of behavior where, okay, we made the solution, can we sell the solution to other people as well? And so if you follow that path, you have a lot of interesting things coming out of Microsoft and Google and Amazon that actually are showing promise in terms of localization and speech and text and translation and automated models and other systems. So it's pretty interesting horizon there, and they're constantly developing, and they're so rich. They have so many people, they have so much to go work on that you'll never know what they're coming up next. But I'd say every 6 to 8 months, I go shop around at Amazon Invent, or I go look at Google Developer Days, or all the Microsoft events. You just look at them and say, okay, I didn't know that was happening. And you'll be surprised, even right now in Office, in PowerPoint, you can do transcriptions and live demos and other translation stuff that was impossible about a year ago or 2 years ago. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
So I'd like to ask one more question real quick.
Sure.
All I'm hearing is about a bunch of new technologies. And I remember back to my studies, it's been almost 20 years ago, that I remember this graph of these people and like it was a bell curve, right? And there were early adapters, and then there were the people that waited for it to be established, and then there were the late adapters, and then
the laggards,
too late, right? How important is it for a CTO in particular to be an early adapter? Because it sounds to me like you are.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's a lossy position, meaning you adopt things that no one ever takes on, and it's part of the risk. So in a way, probably better off to be in the middle, to be honest. But if you really want to gain that advantage, because you do get, a year or half a year on top of people, in front of people that don't have this technology. So you come from the future, in their eyes. And so it's worth it. Is it always worth it? No, you get a lot of junk that never works, and then you go, oops, well, so I'd say you get that 20% achievement, and it costs you maybe 5 to 10%. That's part of learning. It's part of growing. So I'm willing to make that trade-off.
Yeah.
Mm. Gilbert, I know that this company has encouraged you to think and to look out into the future and all that, but are there things that you actually dream of, that you say, I wonder if this is possible? I mean, does your thought process go that far to say, I don't just look at things that are kind of emerging now. I actually think of things that could be, if someone were to just kind of dive in and make this happen, maybe in 10 years time, this could happen. Is there things that you see way down the road that you only dream about now, that you might be a prophet and say, this is probably going to happen?
Yeah, there are things like that, but I also call it 10 years or $10 million, really, because you need to hire a team of scientists, computational magicians and wizards who study this, and they do their PhDs on it. And the problem there is that they're already getting hired by everyone else. So maybe it's not 10 million, maybe it's 30 or 50 million, but it's definitely out there. And I am looking at those things and wondering, okay, we're going to get there. And I guess that's the biggest challenge, is knowing that we're getting there, and maybe knowing that, yeah, I was right about that, but okay, so, preparing around it. But there's definitely things that I wish I had the resources to pursue, but they're also, a little pie in the sky. I'll give you that.
Do you want to share one of those? Do you have something in mind?
Well, there's the holy grail of, language translation that basically captures everything properly, sentiment, meaning, and idea, and converts the ideas into to language versus the other way around. Because today again, this is a very deep technical thing, but today we just substitute words for other words and say it says the same thing. Whereas if we were to do a really proper knowledge-based thing, we'd say this concept is this concept here. And the Japanese concept for time, maybe our concept of time is different. So it does create a variation on that. And that enables us to have the opportunity to open any door. Because then you can do low resource languages, you can do other languages, because you're dealing with concepts and thoughts, not just the way of saying them. So it's definitely a little bit out there. It's almost philosophy instead of technology. And that's where you're at the edge. That's where I want to be.
Sounds like Dr. Spock a little bit when he put the fingers on the forehead. He says, I can read your mind.
Yes, exactly.
I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, there's a mystical, I wouldn't say mystical, but there's definitely something that's not here about it. And that's kind of where I think we can go. And it's just a matter of saying, okay, where are the pieces, where are the parts, and then how do they stack up?
Now, my final question is, Gilbert, and I thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to work with you, by the way. But for those people that might be in our audience that are already in let's say the engineering field for localization, for e-learning, what would you say is some of the burdens or the hard parts of a job of being CTO? Because as I see it, we place our most difficult issues basically on your shoulders and say, there has to be a technology way to solve this. And so I wonder if you actually feel that burden, or is there anything else you would like to share with those wannabes who say, someday I aspire to be a chief technology officer?
Well, I would say it's not a burden. It's actually the challenge that brings you here. To be frank, it's about being a moth to the flame of complexity. If the more complicated the problem, the better it looks to me. Obviously, that's kind of contradictory in the sense that I have to solve the problem now and I have to spend extra time working on it. But that does bring real rewards. I'll have a complicated problem brought to me. I'll say, okay, I got to think about this, and just being able to say that as part of your job is to think about things. That gives you certain benefits. And maybe it's a personal thing, but it also helps a lot of other people. right? And the more you challenge yourself with technical complexity and the more results you get from it, the better things, just like I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, it gives you that outsized influence. It gives you that ability to scale and do things that people thought were impossible because you thought about it and you put your noodle to it and you said, look, here's how to do it better and faster. And the best part about it is when you get other people to do it with you and they impress you with what they have been able to figure out because they put their brain to something as well. So I think being able to shepherd that and take that energy and that power of thinking and put it to play is very rewarding. And it's also very, from a business perspective, very, very economically rewarding as well.
Yeah. Now I'll throw in the last criteria of this, right? By the way, Gilbert, this is our biggest problem, and you have until tomorrow to solve it.
Okay.
We don't do that. No way.
We do.
We do. I mean, we've all had the client that comes up, Friday night and says, I got 130 pages of Arabic. I need it by Monday.
Yeah.
And we've had that, right? We had the contract. It was a legal thing. I think it was, I don't remember. It was something that it was a time crunch and volume crunch. And that's the perfect example where we say, okay, I have this tool, I have that tool. And when you're like that, you just put the blinders down and say, okay, this process will get me this process will get me that. Okay, and then you map it out. And then there's tricks you can use to scale to try to get that done, like throw more people on it and then throw something to check because all those people might make mistakes. And, so it gets really in the mix of things. But at the end of the day, it works. And this just comes from experience. So I'm not afraid of those things. I don't ask for them, that's for sure. But when they do happen, I think we have the tools and methodologies to handle them. And I would say, after a hard day's work or hard week's worth or month's work, which we've had on some occasions, it's actually rewarding. You got a lot done. And what I find myself doing is looking back and going, gosh, I did all that. I don't remember because I just was too busy working and thinking about it and executing that I don't necessarily have that. It was a pain, or it was horrible. It was, I don't have that association. I have an accomplishment, not a regret.
Well, from my perspective, Gilbert, you've done an excellent job for us. I really thank you for all I call it the sweat of because we do put deadlines on it, and we often have to say, look, we need a solution and we need it faster than you can imagine. Our clients are asking the same. They need answers quick. But we're at the end of our time. So Gilbert, I just want to say thank you again. You're one of the finest I've met as far as being a chief technology officer. Really appreciate what you do for our company. And Matt, thank you for joining me again for this monthly series. And we'll be back for a September edition very shortly. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gilbert.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Later.